Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye embarks on a marathon 12-day trip to 3 African nations and France. She's being joined by a massive business delegation. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon is set to arrive in South Korea as speculation mounts he could launch a bid for the presidency when his term as UN chief ends later this year. Plus, with a new parliament waiting in the wings, the outgoing National Assembly Speaker bids farewell, saying he supports a controversial new bill that allows the Assembly to open hearings more often. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 25th of May. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, President Park Geun-hye has just set off on a historic 3-nation trip to Africa. Her first stop is Ethiopia, where Seoul will unveil a new aid project and a new vision for the continent. Our presidential office correspondent, Song Ji-son, who is traveling with the president, gives us a preview of the trip.
President Park's departure Wednesday coincides with Africa Day, an annual commemoration that celebrates the unity of the continent. Covering the 3 biggest economies in East Africa, President Park seeks to strengthen economic and development partnership with the continent, considered the last blue ocean in the world with growth of 5% in the 21st century. Seoul will assist Africa with customized development programs while sharing its experience for mutual growth. President Park will further elaborate on her new vision for Africa on Friday in a speech at the Africa Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, making her the first Korean leader to address the continent.
In addition to our diplomacy and official development assistance, Seoul will lay out its vision for Africa in peace and security, mutual growth through economic cooperation, new development models, as well as cultural exchanges.
Seoul is set to unveil its Korea Aid project in Ethiopia, an official development assistance program on wheels offering healthcare and cultural contents. Spreading Hallyu, or the Korean wave, across the African continent, the Korea Aid vehicles will show videos ranging from taekwondo to K-pop and introduce the 2018 Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang. Before President Park leaves for Uganda and Kenya, a business forum will also be held to help our delegation discover the great potential of Ethiopia. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Now, during President Park's trip to Africa, she's expected to share some of South Korea's economic success stories while also enhancing diplomatic relations with the 3 countries on her itinerary. Hwang Ho-jun reports.
With increasing political stability, economic growth, and projected middle class of 500 million by 2030, many call Africa the final untapped growth engine of the global community. Recognizing that potential, the U.S., China, and Japan's heads of state have already visited several African countries. President Park Geun-hye will follow suit to become the 4th South Korean leader to make a visit. She intends to establish business and possibly military cooperation and to launch Korea Aid, an official development assistance program mobilizing special trucks to provide food, health checkups, and cultural contents to people in Africa. Let's take a closer look at some of the main agenda items to be discussed with each country. President Park's first stop, Ethiopia. What's significant here is that Ethiopia is the only African country to have deployed ground troops to Korea during the Korean War. This would be the 2nd time a Korean leader has visited the country since diplomatic relations were established in 1963. With the history, some of the main issues that will be talked about between President Park and the leaders of Ethiopia, including President Mulatu Teshome and Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, is increasing trade and investment and enhancing cooperation in national defense, peacekeeping operations, and healthcare. She will also visit the African Union headquarters to meet with key members of the Commission, including its chair, Madame Nkosazana Zuma, before delivering a speech to introduce Korea's new policy vision for the continent. Next, the president will travel to Uganda. Now, this is the first time the leader of Korea visiting the country since the establishment of diplomatic ties in 1963. The Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni actually was the first head of state to visit Korea after President Park took office in 2013. Together, they will discuss to seek enhanced cooperation between the two countries to tackle the North Korean nuclear issue, as Uganda is known to be a foothold for North Korea in East Africa. Having displayed interest in Saemaul-undong, the political initiative to modernize the Korean rural economy in the 1970s, President Museveni will join President Park on her Saemaul-related activities during the visit. The last stop, President Park's African trip, is Kenya, which will mainly focus on enhancing economic relations of the two countries. It's interesting to note that the fathers of both President Park and Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta were in office when the two countries first established diplomatic relations in 1964. Once she completes her visit in Africa, President Park will head to Paris the following Wednesday for a state visit marking 130 years of diplomatic relations with France. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye's focus during her time in Africa will be on strengthening economic ties, as we just heard, and boosting development in general. All three countries on her itinerary, Ethiopia, Uganda and Kenya, happen to be beneficiaries of Seoul's International Development Aid Programme. Oh Seong with the details.
Sub-Saharan Africa is home to the poorest countries in the world, with almost half of its inhabitants living in extreme poverty. Exposed to adverse climate conditions, tropical diseases and regional conflicts, the area struggles to improve basic livelihood, health, education and job security. To help meet these needs, Korea has been providing Official Development Assistance, or ODA, through its official aid agency since 1991. With the Seoul Declaration in 2009, it strengthened support, pledging to double foreign aid to African countries and produce 2 policy frameworks on development in the region. Since then, aid to the continent has steadily increased, nearing $120 million in 2014.
Our projects focus on agricultural development as well as healthcare and education. Not only do we set up the infrastructure, but we also empower locals with the confidence that they can beat poverty.
There are currently 16 beneficiary countries in the continent, and President Park will be visiting 3 of them. Ethiopia is the biggest beneficiary of Korea's ODA in Africa, with major projects including water management, health, agriculture and infrastructure. Total aid reached more than $88 million as of 2014. In Uganda, the majority of projects focus on lifting locals out of poverty by increasing agricultural productivity and income. Over the years, Korean aid has added up to $27 million. In Kenya, water security, education and governance are the top priorities, and the total amount of aid by 2014 reached almost $40 million. Experts say Korea's involvement in these countries have been well received, despite the lower amount of ODA compared to those of other developed countries.
It is not only the recipient countries appreciating it, but also other donor agencies in Europe and the USA, even international institutions. African countries, especially in the Horn of Africa, they have a very similar, say, factor endowment like what Korea had in 1960s. So they have a very limited natural resources, but plenty of people. So we can share Korean development experience with those countries so that they can catch up faster.
Korea will further its commitment to African development during President Park's trip, unveiling a brand new initiative called Korea Aid. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
Now, in the rest of the day's news, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has a packed schedule lined up upon his arrival today in his home country of South Korea. His first stop is Jeju Island to attend the Jeju Peace Forum, an annual dialogue aimed at promoting peace and prosperity in East Asia. On Thursday, Ban will fly to Japan to attend the G7 summit and then return to Korea on Friday. He will go to the 2016 Rotary International Seoul Convention that opens Sunday and will travel to Huawei Village, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the eastern part of the country. His final day will be spent in Gyeongju in the southeast, where he will attend a regional UN conference. Now, Ban's visit is garnering extra attention as he is widely expected to run in Korea's next presidential election in 2017. Ban, however, remains tight-lipped about his plans after his second and final term as UN chief ends in December. With the new 20th National Assembly starting its term next week, the outgoing National Assembly Speaker has wrapped up his two-year term with a farewell press conference. Zhang Uihua, a five-term lawmaker and former neurosurgeon, said Wednesday that two of the 19th National Assembly's biggest achievements were the passage of reforms to the public servant pension system and a strict anti-corruption law. He, however, expressed regret about the recent controversy surrounding a proposed revision to the National Assembly Act that would allow for more frequent parliamentary hearings. Zhang defended the bill, saying that having more hearings would lead to a quicker resolution of current issues. However, there's growing speculation the president might veto the proposal on the grounds that frequent hearings could hamper the government's ability to conduct state affairs. The sheer weight of debt held by Korea's ailing shipbuilders has local banks on edge, massively exposed to loans that might turn sour at any given moment. The industry could be facing some serious problems of its own as the government's restructuring program goes full steam ahead. Park Jong-hong reports.
The perfect storm seems to be brewing for Korea's banking industry as the nation's shipbuilding sector faces sweeping restructuring. This is because banks would have to ramp up their debt service coverage ratio when loans held by the shipbuilders, which are mostly classified as normal, turn out to be bad debt. Doing that would weigh heavily on their financial operations. Currently, the aggregate amount of loans held by the so-called Big Three shipbuilders, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, Hyundai Heavy Industries, and Samsung Heavy Industries, come to about 50 trillion won, or roughly 42.1 billion US dollars. This is 25 times more than the loans of shipping companies combined. Experts fear the shockwaves from the loans turning bad could pulse through the entire banking industry, leading to devastating losses for Korea's commercial banks. There have been growing concerns about whether the country's state-run banks can handle the fallout from the government-led restructuring program. Korean shipbuilders, once growth engines of the economy, have been struggling to cut costs and secure liquidity to stay afloat in an industry-wide slump. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Huawei Technologies has filed lawsuits against Samsung Electronics for alleged infringement of its smartphone patents. This is the first such case by the Chinese firm against the world's biggest mobile maker. The lawsuits were filed in the US and China and seek compensation for what it said was unlicensed use of fourth-generation cellular communications technology, operating systems and user interface software in Samsung phones. In a statement, the Chinese phone maker said it hopes the Korean tech giant will stop infringing its patents and get the necessary license from Huawei and work together with it to jointly drive the industry forward. Now, this lawsuit marks an about-face for Chinese firms, which have often been on the receiving end of patent infringement disputes. Korea's international investment, excluding investment by foreigners, surpassed $200 billion for the first time ever in March. According to the Bank of Korea, the nation's combined overseas investment stood at $1.17 trillion at the end of March, up $32.5 billion from the end of last year. Of this, Korea's net international investment rose to almost $216 billion. Analysts say it shows the nation's overseas investment has been climbing steadily despite slow investment in its unstable domestic market. Korea's exports to China fell for a 10th straight month in April. According to the Korea International Trade Association, the nation's exports to its neighboring country last month amounted to $9.6 billion, down 18.4% from the previous year. The figure has been on a continued downturn since a 6.5% decline last July, and this, in fact, marks the longest slump since the 2008 global financial crisis. Korea's exports to China, including semiconductors, flat panel displays and sensors and petroleum products, make up a third of the nation's export total. Experts attribute the plunge to decreased demand for intermediary products in China, which is moving to support domestic producers. Korea's leading conglomerates are drastically reducing their executive ranks amid the prolonged economic downturn and lackluster business performances. Data released on Wednesday by CEO Score, a business management evaluation website, shows that the country's top 30 conglomerates have cut nearly 500 executives in the past year alone. Considering that only 5 executives were cut the year before, this clearly represents a major reshuffling of staff at the boardroom level. Samsung Group cut the largest number of executives at 374, followed by Doosan Group at 102. Hyundai Heavy Industries cut 41 executives as the nation's shipbuilding sector is floundering, as we heard, under massive amounts of debt. The US Air Force plans to develop its own seismic technology program to better detect North Korea's nuclear activities. In a report attached to the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2017, the US Senate Armed Services Committee says it supports the $7.5 million allocated to developing the related technologies. The report said the program is a key element in detecting and monitoring Pyongyang's nuclear activities. The US Air Force has used reconnaissance aircraft to detect radioactive materials after North Korea's previous nuclear tests. Experts say the Senate's support for the program shows Washington is increasingly concerned about North Korea's growing intercontinental ballistic missile capability. And that's where we're going to leave it on this Wednesday afternoon in Seoul. For more of the latest, you can check out our website. You can find it by going to arirang.com/news. We also have a comprehensive smartphone application. You can find all the latest news and programs on there just by searching for Arirang TV in your app store. Have a wonderful hump day. Goodbye.